All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Shamas. I'm a sales tech here at Nagios Enterprises. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on Nagios Log Server. There will be quite a few different organizations joining in here with us today, so I'll be giving you a higher level overview of Log Server and its capabilities. But after the session, you should have a really good idea of how to get around the interface, how to leverage key features, how to accomplish common tasks like getting source data in, querying it, dashboarding it, alerting on it. We will be primarily focusing on Nagios Log Server, which is our enterprise-class log collection, analysis, archiving, and alerting platform, since that's what most attendees have requested to see. One quick note that audio feeds from you guys will be muted during the session, but if you have any questions, go ahead and type those into the chat or the questions sections of the GoToWebinar interface. And at the end of the session, we will leave plenty of time to cover those. So definitely be more than happy to help with any questions that you've got. And just go ahead and punch those in, and then we'll be sure to cover each one of those for you at the end of the session. Also, if you have questions beyond what we can cover here today, you can always contact us by email at sales@nagios.com, and we'll do everything we can to answer those for you. And finally, if you'd like a demo tailored specifically for your organization, either on Log Server or any of our other solutions like XI or Network Analyzer or Fusion or maybe a combination of tools, feel free to email again sales@nagios.com, and we'll put together a custom demo for you. And finally, we will be recording today's session so it can be made available to others online in the future. So with that being said, let's start out by talking a little bit about what we're going to talk about. We'll jump over to our agenda slide here. And so we'll start out with just some quick background on Log Server, what it's built on, where it came from, what its primary focus is, and also a little bit about architecture and how the underlying components function. Then we'll talk about setting up common sources to send data into Log Server. And so we'll look at things like Windows systems, Linux systems, network devices, and tell you how to actually get that data into Log Server so you can make use of it. And then we'll jump into things like querying and alerting on the data, creating custom dashboards and things like that. And then we'll finish up from a more administrative perspective, talking about things like users, managing your backup and restore settings, and things like that. So to start out with, we'll talk a little bit about what Log Server is built on. And so Log Server is built on the ELK stack. That's Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which a lot of you might be familiar with. A very popular open source log management stack. And Log Server is nice because it combines these three elements into an integrated whole and gives you an integrated, quick and easy to install, easy to administer, and fully supported way to leverage the power of the ELK stack. So the ELK, Elasticsearch, that's actually where all of the data is data-based, and that's actually what you access when you run queries to find different types of data. Logstash acts as the collector, so data is sent to Logstash, which intakes it, parses it, and then moves it into Elasticsearch. And then Kibana provides the visualization front end, and we use a heavily modified version of Kibana. In Log Server 2, Elasticsearch and Logstash were both updated to a more current version. Elasticsearch, the current version is 1.7.6, and Logstash is now at 2.4, and so some performance and security increases there. And then again, Kibana is a fairly heavily modified version of it, so wouldn't typically, from this point forward, parallel the original project. And as far as how it works, from an architectural perspective, it's actually really cool how Log Server functions. So let me pull out an annotation tool here real quick, and we'll talk a little bit about how it actually works. So it's a clustered solution, and so it's very easy to make multiple machines work together. So you've got clustered redundancy and load balance faster searches. And what it actually does is all of the log data, all of the log events that are collected each day are placed into what is called an index. And so I'll do a little annotation here to help explain this. And then that Elasticsearch index is broken into 5 pieces called shards. And so the way that it handles the redundancy is that it'll place a primary of each shard on one machine and a replica on another machine. And in the event that, say, the machine hosting the replica goes into a critical state, the system will immediately realize that and try to continue to retain redundancy even in the face of instances dying. So it'll actually create a new replica shard over here so that you've still got a backup of your data even though an instance has died. And the same thing would keep happening. If this one were to go into a critical state, the next one would get that replica shard. Same concept with the primary shard. And so it's very easy to cluster instances together, and then it gives you that clustered redundancy to make sure that your data is safe. Now, as far as getting the data to Log Server, it's strictly a send from the sources upstream to the Log Server instances. And by default, you'd configure each source, be it a switch or a server. You'd have that source send its data upstream to Log Server, and then Log Server would collect it and intake it and parse it. And that works well, sending it to a specific instance. But if that instance goes into a problem state, then that data has nowhere to go. So for maximum availability and highest efficiency, what you'd want to do is put a load balancer or round-robin DNS setup in front of the Log Server cluster, and then have the sources send their data to that mechanism, which would then route it to whatever instance is available. So it's definitely possible to send the data up to an individual instance. That's a great way to do it. But an even better way, again, would be to have a load balancer or round-robin DNS set up in front of it and send the data to that. And then once the data is collected, there's a bunch of different things that can happen at that point. Log Server can send an SNMP trap, it can send an email, it can execute a script, and it can also send data upstream to a tool like Nagios XI. And I'll show you a couple of different ways to interact with Nagios XI. Some of the people on the session today may well be using Nagios XI for their regular monitoring. And so Log Server acts as a great supplement. It gives you a whole nother layer of depth as you monitor the things in your infrastructure. So at that point, you're checking not only things like hardware metrics like CPU and memory and drive space and services and processes and application health, but you're also collecting logs from all those devices, and you've got that additional layer of depth and complexity to dig into to make sure things are running well and things are secure. So you can also send the data upstream to XI. And then in addition to the ability to alert many different ways and take actions when a problem is found, you also have custom dashboards that you can create. So the dashboards are ways where you can have different graphs and charts and panels and even things like geographic maps to help you visualize the log data. And then, of course, the query capability, so you can drill down to very specific subsets of the data and only visualize data points that you're interested in across all of the log data that's been collected. So that's a quick walkthrough on the architectural front. Let me clear my annotations here real quick, and then we'll just jump right into the interface and take a look around. So, get back to my regular cursor here. There we go. Now let's jump into Log Server 2.0, and we'll log in here real quick. And so when you first log into the system, you've got a quick heads-up display here that'll show you, for example, how many hosts are sending data in, how many sources are sending data, quick information about the alerts you have set up, information about how many instances you're running in your cluster. You've got a number of logs over the last 15 minutes, and then you can kind of drill down to very specific data points here. You've got quick access links to setup guides, and we'll dig into those in a second. And then links to your global and personal dashboards. So dashboards being how you're visualizing the log data. You'll notice there's global dashboards, meaning everyone in the system can access them. There's also personal dashboards, meaning just your particular user would have access to those. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that we've got 12 unique hosts sending data in. One great thing about Log Server 2.0 is that you can actually click on a report, and this will give you visibility of the specific sources that are sending data in, so the host name of those sources that are sending in data. You can not only see sources that are currently active, but you can also see sources that were sending data in, but that no longer are as of the last hour, so it'll check this hourly. And if this is a source that's never going to be back online, you do have the option to delete these too, but until you remove them using the X, they will stay here. That way you know data used to come in from this, but is no longer being found. And then, like I said, you've got access to your dashboards and everything here, information about whether you're running the latest version or not. Now, as a starting point in the interface, let's take a look at adding data to Log Server. So step one is to get your sources to send their data in. And so we'll click plus log source. And you've got quick setup guides for Linux, Windows, network devices, some certain application logs like Apache, IAS, MySQL, MS SQL, PHP, ways to monitor Linux files and Windows files. You can also do a one-time import from an archived log, so you can just bring in a batch of log data from somewhere else. So for a Linux system, very simple. It's going to use the rsyslog daemon. And you've got a quick setup script. You can curl for it here and then run this command, which is basically just saying, send the log data from this system to this particular IP, so the IP of one of the instances in this cluster, on port 5544, the default syslog port. And the nice thing is, any data hitting 5544 is going to go into the syslog input, and we'll look at Logstash inputs a little later, and automatically be parsed as syslog. So the port the data comes in on helps Log Server understand what kind of data it is, and then parse it accordingly with the correct filter. There's also a manual option if you want to manually modify your syslog.conf file. And there's also a manual syslog ng option if you want to go that route. For a Windows system, it's actually going to use a lightweight client. So on Linux, it's using the syslog daemon, so a native daemon. In Windows, it's going to be using nxlog, which is very quick and easy to install. It's an open source project. And then once it's installed, you basically just replace the contents of your nxlog.conf file with everything you see here. And similar to the way the syslog setup goes, this is actually going to define some important stuff, such as where that data should go, what port it should come in on. Here, instead of 5544, we're coming in on 3515. And so log server goes, oh, okay, that's event log data. Let's parse it accordingly. So you replace the contents of the nxlog.conf file with the data you see here, and then run a quick net start nxlog from the command prompt, and that'll start the nxlog service, and it'll start sending event log data upstream to log server. So that's really easy to set up. And then for things like network devices, it just kind of depends on the network device, but essentially you need to configure that device to send its log data to a particular IP, or maybe a host name if you do have a load balancer in place, for example. And then on 5544, so it'll intake this just like any other syslog. And so there is a generic setup guide here, and a quick link tool here you can use to actually verify that you're receiving logs from that particular device. And you've got a Cisco setup guide, you've got a Juniper setup guide. And so again, it will kind of depend on the type of device, but each one's a little different, and you really just tell it where to send the data and what port to send it to, and then you'll start to be able to collect it and query it and make use of it. For things like Apache, it's very similar. So you'd be running that essentially the same setup script, only you're defining, you're adding an additional argument here to define the path to the Apache error and access logs. And there is already a built-in filter that's going to parse Apache error and Apache access log data into queryable fields. And there's actually a really nice Apache dashboard that we'll look into as well when we jump into those. For something like MySQL, we'll click through here real quick. And so the first thing you do is add a MySQL filter. And so this is going to tell log server how to properly parse that data. And then all the commands you need to run down here. There is a scripted option, there's a manual option. So very similar options to what you'd see for just regular syslog data. For something like MS SQL, even easier. You'd basically just run the Windows setup guide, and that's basically it. You'll be getting that data, so it makes it really easy. And you'll notice here you've also got the verify incoming logs option. And then, for example, to import from a file, it'll give you the instructions to actually ship that data right into log server. And so you can take a bunch of historical records that you've got, historical log events, and move those over into log server. So a lot of options, and a really important point to keep in mind with Nagios Log Server is that it can handle pretty much any kind of machine-generated log data. It's not really limited to any particular type of data because of the power of Logstash to parse pretty much anything. And so there are built-in filters for syslog and event log in the applications you see here. But ultimately, you can collect pretty much any kind of data, whether it's a less common application, maybe it's a proprietary application that you've created that has non-standard logs. So there's really no limit to what you can intake, pretty much any kind of machine-generated log data, and going a step further, really pretty much any kind of text-based data at all. I mean, really, you could probably parse a cookbook if you wanted to. And so Log Server is a great platform for pretty much any kind of log data. But the things that you see here, these are going to be quick, easy to set up, and then other items might require you to write a custom grok filter to parse the data properly. So you can see adding data from common sources is really quick and easy. You've got the setup guides here. And then once that data is hitting the system, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with it. And so we'll bounce back to our home menu here, and we'll start to look at queries and dashboards. So there are some dashboards that are going to be built in right out of the box if maybe you're using the free 60-day trial. For example, you've got the top sources and types. And this is a nice starting dashboard just to take a quick look at. So here you can see, for example, the top hosts that are sending in data and how many log events have been collected for them. You can see the top types. We've got a lot of Apache access, a little bit of syslog, a little bit of event log. Total events over time to look for spikes, times when a ton of log entries came in. Maybe that's an indicator that something had gone wrong with the system and it generated a lot more logs. And then down below, you've got information on each of the individual log events. So for example, if I just wanted to look at syslog, one other great thing about the dashboard panels here is that we could just click this, and that's going to automatically add a filter here for us saying that we just want to look for the type syslog. And so with a single click from one of the visualizations, now we're just looking at syslog data. So I'll expand one of these entries, and all of these are the various fields that have been parsed in this particular log entry. So each one is something unique that you can use to filter for specific types of data, for very granular subsets of the data. Now, you can also, with this, these links that are right here in the actions column, you can add a filter to match a particular value, meaning it must match that value. You can add a filter to not match the value, so adding a not statement and saying that this can't be part of the data. And to the right of these entries, you've also got the ability to do a quick search on Google or Bing or Stack Overflow just to see if there's relevant results, and it will actually sanitize that data so you're not sending things like internal IP addresses out into the wild and things like that. So top sources and types is a nice one. Another nice starting dashboard is the Log Server search dashboard. So it starts out really open-ended. So it starts out looking at a day ago to a few seconds ago, but you can expand this and make it any time period you want to. You'll see a bunch of defaults here, or you can do a custom. Let's say we wanted to look at the last 2 days worth of data, and then you'll notice that just adds a filter here. And then down below are all the related entries. Now what we could do is start to actually filter. And so by default, the queries here are going to be Apache Lucene, but you can also do regex or top N, and you can color code it if you want to. But we'll just keep this simple to start with, and we'll go ahead and just punch in an IP address. So we'll look for data from an HP ProCurve that's in our environment here, one of our test systems. And you see we do have matching results here. I also notice as I scroll down that we've got some other results that don't necessarily apply to .41, but do include its data somewhere within them. Now, one way to fix that would be to pop open one of the specifically related logs, and we see that the host field is where .41 is indicated. So we'll scroll back up to the top here real quick and just append our query a little bit to make it more detailed. And now we're just seeing data from .41, so we've narrowed it down to just data from this particular host. Now if we take a look at these, I've got some with info, I've got some with warnings, some with critical. It may be that you're not too concerned about info, and so we might want to negate that. And I'm actually going to show you a couple of ways to approach this, just so you know that there are many options for it. So one thing you could do, probably the easiest way to do it, would be to just add a filter saying must not be info. And you'll notice with these you can edit these, and so we can flip this to must not if you want to change it, and we'll actually apply that. And so now basically we've said we want to see everything but info, and so now we're down to warning and critical. So that's one easy way to approach it. What we could also do is toggle this off for a second, go back down and take a look. We could add warning, for example, and add a filter that must match this particular value. Now we're down to just our warnings. For just a second, we'll toggle that off. We'll go back and find one of our criticals, and we will add a filter to match that value. And you'll notice here, you've basically got two options. It either must or must not match this value. There's actually a third option that you don't see until you look at the config options for a filter. So what we'll do is we will go to the edit section here, and you've got must, must not, and either. And so I showed you two different ways to do it, just so you know that either is actually an option in the filter. And so we'll make this one either as well, and we'll save that. We'll toggle it back on, we'll save this. And so now either warning or critical, and now we're down to our warnings and criticals. And again, you could accomplish the same thing just by turning on your must not info in this particular case, and then toggling these off. So definitely experiment with the filters. On the query front, it's the Apache Lucene would support common operators. So you could do and, you could do or, you could do not, grouping things in parentheses. You can also add additional. So here's one query, and then you can stack it next to another one. And so this would basically be kind of compartmentalizing the queries, only they're all going to apply to the data that you're seeing here. One nice thing about this is that if I, for example, we'll go down to warning here, and so that's log severity. And so we'll add this one. There we go. And one nice thing about it is that it will actually color code the data. And so you can see down here in the graph that we've got events over time, we can see what portions of the data that are a result of the query a warning is responsible for. So using queries here actually does give you the ability to kind of do some cool color coding and things in your events over time graphs and pie charts. So as you can see, there's a lot of flexibility to help you determine exactly what kind of data you want to see. And not only that, but there's a lot of flexibility in determining how you want to see the data too. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. The dashboards themselves can be customized in many different ways. And so what we're going to do for now is, so we've got our query in place here, and we'll actually clear this one out and just leave these two. We'll go ahead and save what we've got. So if we go up here to Manage Queries, we'll just save this one as .41, Morn and Crit, and maybe we'll make this a global query and create it. That way we can come back to it later. And now we'll take a look at dashboard. So if you look on the upper right here, you do have a lot of options. You can go to your Save Default dashboard, which for us is a very simple security dashboard. You can manage your queries, save what you've created as one, delete them, so on and so forth. You can create alerts based on what you're currently looking at, and we will dig into that too. And you can load dashboards and save the changes that you've made here, and set what you're looking at as your default dashboard, export the dashboard, so a lot of options there. You can also share it if you'd like to. It'll give you a URL to share this with other people. And you've got a configure dashboard section here. And I'll just point out real quick, if you look at the time drop down here, you do have some default time frames here. You've got the custom options, so really any time period is possible. But if there's a common time period that you'd like to show up in the drop down for quick reference that you don't see here right away, just go to configure dashboard, go to your time picker section, and you can actually add additional options to the drop down. So that's a nice feature too. But what we're going to do here is we'll go to load, and we're just going to load an empty dashboard. So we're basically going to start from scratch. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll add a row, and we'll give it a name. We'll call this one our fields. And we'll create it. And then we'll call another one panels and create that. And then we'll put, you can use these small arrows here to put one above the other. And we'll save it, and so now you've got 2 empty rows. Now to me, the easiest way to add panels is to first add that fields table that we see at the bottom of the built-in dashboards. So we're going to go here, we're going to select a panel type, we're going to go to table, and the only change we're going to make is we're going to span this to 12, so it goes all the way across the screen width. And we'll apply that, and there we go. Now you notice we don't have any data here, but that's because we don't have a time filter in place. So we're looking for everything from a query perspective, but don't have a time in place by default in this dashboard. So we'll go back to a 2-day view, and there we go. Now we've got a bunch of data in here. So that's how you can add the original fields table, and then you'll notice you also don't have these columns here. So by clicking the various fields that are in the total list on the left here, you can very easily add columns. So we'll go to, for example, timestamp, and that might be a really good one. That way they're ordered by timestamp for us. And then the host that it's related to would probably be a natural second choice. The type, is it syslog, is it event log? So we'll go down and pick that. And then maybe the message itself would be of use, but really the sky's the limit. Anything you want to pick here works great. And so we'll add that. And now we've got all of our log data here. So it's very quick and easy to create the table, add the columns. And one cool thing here too, while we're talking about adding these columns, is that first off, you can order them however you want to. So you'll notice small arrows here. And second off, in Log Server 2, you can actually export these as a CSV. And so all of the data that you've put in the columns, and you can add as many of these as you want to the columns, so these parsed fields of the log events can be exported as a CSV, and that's a feature that there were a ton of requests for, and we're really glad that that's part of Log Server 2 now. So you can do the CSV export. So we've got our fields table here, and now we can start to add panels. Now one way to approach that would just be to add a panel this way, just like we did our table, and pick all of our settings here. But an even easier way to do it is just to click on the name of one of these fields. So for example, we'll click something like event ID and see if anything pops up there. And kind of go through these and see whichever ones might have values that we can use. So here we go. We can do GOIP IP. Take a look at that one. We see some results here. And so if you find something that you would like to add to a panel, you can just go to terms here and create a table, a pie chart, a bar graph. So we'll just say we want this one to be a pie. And so it's going to load the top 10 terms there. And then we can take this and just drag it up to our empty row. and it'll actually populate it up above. And then we can close this one and then go to configure here, and we can change the span. So we'd probably want this one to be a span of 4, for example. And then now maybe we don't want to see other values. I see a lot of missing, I see a lot of other, so maybe we can clear those and then save it. And now we've got some more useful data. And again, you can just click these to click through to an automatic query for the data that you see here. So we made a pie chart. Next, maybe we'll make a bar graph. So we'll take a look at maybe something like source name, or the host should have some nice data. There we go. And so we'll go to terms here. Maybe we'll make this a table. Now, one thing I'll mention is that if you try to drag this up to the right of the panel that's already there, it is going to bounce back down. But if you drag it up to the left, it'll populate it above the existing one. And then you can configure it and span it down to 4. And then it'll just pop in alongside the other one. And so you can add as many panels as you want. I'll also note that once you've got data in your rows, you can hover over on the upper left here and minimize those very easily. And so just to kind of clean things up, if you want to say, for example, add additional rows, just minimize those, go to add row, and it makes it really easy to do for you. Now, once you've customized the dashboard, then you can just go up here and go to dashboards, and we'll save this one as our awesome webinar dashboard. And then you can choose to make it, again, a dashboard just for you or a global dashboard for all users. So we'll save that one. And now you can reference this one anytime. Now, for a really cool dashboard, I'll show you the Better Apache dashboard as kind of a shining example of the cool stuff you can do with dashboards. So this is Apache data. And so it's a very simple query. It's just a wildcard for a query, actually, but we're looking for just Apache access type data. And then a couple of more filters here in place to narrow things down. But with this particular dashboard, we're seeing some really useful Apache data. So like where are all the requests coming from around the world? It puts it in a geographic context and creates a really nice visualization. So here's drill down to the US, how many requests are coming from certain states, and then a world view, how many requests are coming from certain countries. And then bandwidth, top 10 terms. So for example, if you wanted to take a look at 404s, just click that, it's going to create a new filter, and now we'll just have 404 data down below, total events, and with the filters, again, they're really easy to take off and then bring back the full data set. So the dashboards are really flexible, they're really customizable, you can have as many as you want. And another thing I'll point out is that on the Nagios Exchange community site, there are a bunch of community dashboards available too. So like that Better Apache dashboard that we just saw, that's on the Nagios Exchange. If we do a quick search for Log Server, and for those of you that aren't familiar with it, this is the Nagios Exchange community site, and this is where millions of Nagios users all over the world contribute projects. The bulk of the stuff here is going to be based around Nagios Core and Nagios XI, things like check plugins, but there is some cool log server stuff here too. So 24 listings. If we go to the Nagios Log Server search section, you see we've got a bunch of dashboards, a couple of filters and outputs, and if we click through to dashboards, you've got an asterisk log analyzer. Here's that Better Apache dashboard. Cisco ASA VPN monitoring, similar concept where it kind of brings geography into the context. DHCP messages, Exchange, IAS, mail log, McAfee, so lots of cool options. I will point out the Windows Security sysadmin dashboards and Windows sysadmin dashboards. These are really cool because they actually contain multiple dashboards. And so you can download these. And the cool thing is with Log Server, you just download these projects and then bouncing back to Log Server. If you go to load, you'll notice down at the very bottom you've got advanced, and just browse for that file, drop it in, and then it'll give you that dashboard. So it's really easy to share them. And you can also save and go to advanced and export, and then this will create that file. So if you want to share the stuff that you've done on the Nagios Exchange, that's certainly possible and certainly appreciated. Everybody always likes to see what other people have created. So dashboards are really flexible, and so you can see it's easy to query for certain things. It's easy to create visualizations, and with a little extra work, you can create some really cool stuff, like again, this Better Apache dashboard. Another thing you might want to do is alert on that data, and that's absolutely possible too. So what we're going to do is real quick, we're just going to go back to our home dashboard, and then we're going to fire up that .41 warn and critical query. And so I'll just outline these options here real quick too. So you can export the query to a file, you can overwrite your query with what's in the dashboard, you can trash it, or you can basically load this query in the current dashboard. So we'll do that. and make sure it's showing the information that we're interested in, and it looks like it's doing great. And so there's a few ways to approach this. You could either go to the alerting tab or just click the bell icon up here to create an alert. And so we'll call this one .41 warning crit. And our check interval is simply how often you'd like to run this check and look for matching results. The look back period is how far back in the data you'd like to go. So for example, we could go back 30 minutes. So we're checking every 5 minutes, but looking back over 30 minutes worth of data. And then the thresholds are, by default, the number which must be exceeded in order for an alert to go out. So for example, if we set our threshold at 5 for warning and 25 for critical, that means at 6 or more you're going to get a warning alert, and at 26 or more you're going to get a critical alert. And then the alert method, you can either email people directly from the system, execute a script, send an SNMP trap, or send the data upstream to Nagios Core or Nagios XI to integrate query-based log server alerts with the Nagios system. And so for here, we'll just go none. Mainly I just want to show it to you in the interface. And so we created the check. We'll go to View Now. Here's our alerts, and we can see it's pending. It hasn't had a chance to run yet. We can also view the alert history and see exactly what it's done over time. Another quick thing that I'll mention, and if we go over here, we'll actually go to create an alert and edit it. One more thing I wanted to mention, you can see this in the tooltip here too, is that it is possible to alert on the absence of events. So if you're expecting something to happen and want to be alerted if it does not, that's also possible too. Just use 1: in these fields, and that'll make that happen for you. So I'll put my regular thresholds back in, and we'll save this one. And so again, you can easily visualize it. See, we're already getting a warning. We've got 8 matching entries over the course of the first check, and then we can look at the alert history of everything. Now, another way to approach this is to set the alert up in Nagios XI, which integrates really nicely with Nagios Log Server. So we'll log into Nagios XI real quick here and just show you that. There's actually a built-in wizard that makes it super quick and easy to do. So we'll go to our configure menu, and we'll go to our configuration wizards, and we'll just do a quick filter for log server. And there we go, we've got Nagios Log Server here. So the first thing it's asking for is the host address, and that's actually the address of the host that we want to associate this alert with. So it's going to show up as a service underneath that host. To backtrack just a little bit, Nagios XI is our general monitoring, alerting, graphing, and reporting tool. Basically, it monitors and alerts and reports and graphs on pretty much everything that uses electricity except for machine-generated log data and flow data. We've got another tool, Nagios Network Analyzer, that handles the flow data side of things. So that's what XI does, pretty much everything but logs, and then Log Server would be the go-to tool for logs specifically. Mainly, the main driver for that is that logs are fairly resource intensive, especially to collect and parse and database and store and things like that. So you wouldn't want to burden a regular monitoring server with it, but they do integrate really nicely, as you can see here. So the second thing it's asking for is the URL. So we'll bounce back here to Log Server and grab that. Super simple, just copy the IP address / Nagios Log Server. We'll jump back in, we'll paste that, and then finally the API key, which you can get by clicking your username on the upper right. And we'll copy that, bring that back over to Nagios XI, and hit next, and that enables Nagios XI to talk to Log Server. And so now you can see you can actually do a couple of cool things. First off, you can leverage all those queries you've set up on the Log Server side. So it makes it really easy to just leverage the work you've already done over there. You also have the option to do your own Lucene or JSON queries on the fly. So you can actually just punch them in here and make new queries that Nagios will check against to run active checks against Log Server and alert based on those query-based results. So then you've got that data in XI, whether you send the alerts to XI or have XI check Log Server, all that data is right in here for you, and you've got nice centralized visibility of everything happening across both applications. So the alerting features are also very strong. And so that's a little bit of information about getting data in, querying it, dashboarding it. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the configuration side of things too, and the administrative side of things. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go up here to configure and go to the configuration editor. Now there's a few different things you'll notice here. First off, we'll look at global config. Now this is where your Logstash inputs, outputs, and filters are all going to be defined. So first off, on the input front, if we expand one of these, this is what tells Log Server what port certain types of data should be expected on. And then this is in the case of things like syslog and event log data, the port that's going to be populated in the setup guide for you. And so here 5544 is syslog, event log comes in on 3515. And based on the port the data comes in on, it will then be parsed accordingly. Now, syslog and event log, you're actually not going to see a filter explicitly displayed here because those are just kind of an assumed functionality. They're under the hood. But there is a built-in filter, for example, for Apache. So this is an example of a grok filter for Apache access or Apache error data. And so you can kind of get an example here. You can also create your own grok filters, as we talked about, to parse pretty much any kind of data. So it's really flexible in that respect. And then here's a GeoIP filter, which would be necessary in order to use that better Apache dashboard. And there's instructions built into that dashboard too on the Nagios Exchange. And then there's also the concept of outputs, which would be feeding the data elsewhere. So the built-in output is just going to feed that data to the Elasticsearch database, but you can also output other places if you want to and shuffle that data along. So you've got a global config. You also have a per instance configuration here. So in some cases, you would want different inputs, outputs, and filters for each instance in your cluster. But most of the time, it's all just going to be in global config, and they'll all have the same configuration. When you make changes to inputs, outputs, and filters, you then apply configuration, and it takes a snapshot, so you could roll it back if you wanted to change back to an older configuration on those fronts too. There's also the admin section, which we'll jump over to real quick here. So first off, you've got an audit log, and you can filter for a particular time frame. You can look for jobs, alert info, security, config, maintenance. Now, this would be an audit log of actual system activity, so activity within Nagios Log Server to help you understand what users were doing. So that's built right in. You can also see the status of your cluster, see what the primary size is, the size of the primary instance, the total size, see your status. If you are running a single instance, then you would actually see yellow here because you don't have any redundancy. But as long as you're running 2 or more and you have 2 or more instances up, you'll get the green status here. Shows you how many instances you've got, and then it'll show you all of the various indexes that are present in the system. You've also got instance status, so you can actually see on a per instance basis how things are doing. Things like 1, 5, and 15-minute load average, CPU percent, memory, storage, make sure the Elasticsearch and Logstash services are running, and then you've got snapshots and maintenance. Now, this is a really important section because this is where you determine things like how long you keep the data on the cluster. So first off, you've got optimize. And we talked about indexes and how from a clustering standpoint, the index is broken into 5 pieces called shards and distributed across the cluster as primaries and replicas and doing all that redundancy stuff. But a day's index, all the log events collected for a day, is actually a bunch of different indexes. And what optimization does is it pushes all of those into what is actually a consolidated index. Now, optimization will actually help you query quicker over time. And so if you're looking at older data and the index has been optimized, your queries will be more responsive and faster. But when it's being optimized, it does use extra resources during that time of day that it's actually optimizing everything. And we'll dig into when those actual jobs run too. But optimization is a good idea. You can close indexes older than a certain number of days. Now, closing the index means that it's still going to be on the cluster, but it won't be queryable. It'll basically be in cold storage on the cluster and won't be using other resources like memory and CPU. And so it's good to close them, and then you can always just click a single button to open that index back up and query it. Basically, any open indexes will be using other resources beyond just drive space because they're kind of cached. That way when you query, the system can find data on them very quickly. So you can close them after a period of time. You can delete indexes older than a period of time. And keep in mind, delete really means delete. So they will no longer be on your cluster. And also keep in mind that a setting of 0 means it's disabled. So in this case, we currently don't have the system set to delete older than at all. It's just going to keep them indefinitely. You can also send that data to an external repository. So you can set it up. It's got to be mountable from every instance in the cluster. And retain it for as long as you want to on the repository to take the burden off of Log Server, and then you can always restore those backup snapshots to the cluster. So say, for example, there's an audit in 2 years and you need to demonstrate that something did or did not happen at a certain time. This gives you a way to keep the load off of Log Server since it's unlikely you'll need that data every day. I mean, in some cases you might, but for most organizations, you're looking at more recent data. But you can put it in the repository, and another important benefit of that is that typically you'd want fast disks on your Log Server instances. If you can get SSDs, that's a great way to approach it. It'll really help with performance. But for the repository, it could be slower, cheaper storage. So you can invest in fast disks for Log Server, the instances, and then not have to worry so much about the speed of the repository. So there's that setting as well. And so the way we have it set up, after 2 days, they'd be optimized. After 30 days, they'd be closed, but still on the cluster. They'd never be deleted from the cluster. They would be shipped over to this repository, and then they'd be kept there for 720 days. So you can really customize these to meet your retention and audit requirements and fine-tune it to meet any kind of requirements you've got there. So that's snapshots and maintenance. There's also system status. Here's just a quick way for you to go to an instance and restart Elasticsearch, restart, stop Logstash, so kind of interact with these services right from the GUI. You can also download a system profile, which if you ever need to do troubleshooting or everything or anything, work with our support team on items. This will be very useful. It has a lot of useful information about the system and setup. There's the command subsystem. Here's actually where those jobs like snapshots and maintenance are all going to be. And so if you do want to change when these occur, you can just go to edit here and change the next runtime and the frequency to meet whatever requirement you've got. And you can also run these proactively. Now this is something that was added in Log Server 2.0 as well, and just run these jobs and take care of those whenever you want to. Moving over to user management, this is where you would create users, and there is an LDAP AD component built right in, so it makes it really easy to authenticate users via those mechanisms rather than the built-in local authentication. And when you go to create a user, it basically just asks you for their full name, their email, their username, their password, the language that you'd like to run the system in by default for them. And there are a lot of languages built in, so there's good internationalization in Log Server. And then whether they're going to do local auth or AD or LDAP. And then in permissions, this is where you can kind of determine what this person can see and do. So if you make them an admin, they basically have full access and access to and visibility of everything. If you make them a user, they've got limited access, and then you determine down here exactly what they can do. So on the alerts front, can they view them? Can they create them? Can they edit them and delete them? If you make them an admin, it basically just gives them all capabilities. On the configuration front, if you make them an admin, it gives them all configuration capabilities. If they don't have this checked here in configuration, they actually won't even see this menu. So you can kind of play around with the user settings and then be able to really easily fine-tune it so that each person accessing the system only has the capabilities that you'd like that particular user to have. And to set up the LDAP and AD servers, you just set those up here, very simple to do. You've got some global settings, like the default language, the cluster host name. So here's where you'd add the host name if, for example, you did put a load balance setup in place. The interface URL, backup retention, how many of these config snapshots are going to be kept in the configure menu, cluster time zone, and things like that. And also new in Log Server 2 is the proxy configuration. So a lot of organizations, the only way to get out to the internet from your internal network is via proxy. And now in Log Server 2, you can also just very easily set that up via the proxy configuration component. So that's a quick walkthrough of the interface, the key features, getting data in, making use of it, administering the system. Wanted to remind everybody that if you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to help with those. I do see that a couple came in, so feel free to punch in other questions that you've got. I'm more than happy to help with them. And thanks to everybody that asked questions so far. What I'm going to do right now is real quickly jump over and talk a little bit about the licensing side of things, the free trial, the support options, and then we'll bounce over to questions and go from there. So real quickly on the licensing side, Log Server licensing is very competitive because we don't actually license based on the quantity of data you're collecting. We focus just on the number of instances. Now, from a technical perspective, the more data you're collecting, the more instances you'll probably need just to handle the intake and the querying and the parsing of the data and all the other tasks. But you've got the flexibility to basically manage as much data as you can get your install to do. So there is the single instance option for $3,995, and keep in mind these prices do all include 1 year of support and maintenance benefits, so that's all just built right in. You've got email and customer portal and customer forum support with a business day response time guarantee and new version upgrade access. Now for just $1,000 more, you get 2 instances, and at that point you've got clustered redundancy. You've got faster searches. So the 2 instances is definitely a great value, especially for an extra $1,000. And then it goes all the way up to 20 instances. And then 20 plus instances, we can work out custom packages for you. So if you've got a very large environment, there's options there too. But really, it scales great. You just keep stacking on instances, and it's easy to upgrade and add additional instances to your cluster and make it suitable for pretty much any kind of environment. We do have the fully functional 60-day trial. That's available at nagios.com, and we'll jump over there real quick. I'll show you exactly where to go to snag that. So right here on the front page, you've got Nagios Log Server. You can click to the free download or hit the downloads page on the upper right to see all the download options for all the solutions. But if we go to download now, you'll see that there's a Microsoft image. So if you want to run it in Hyper-V, there's a VMware image if you want to run that in VMware. And these two run CentOS 6.9. So all of our solutions are supported on RHEL and CentOS Linux exclusively. So you've got ready-made VM options, very quick and easy way to get started. Otherwise, you can do a manual install onto your RHEL or CentOS Linux system, so that's supported as well. It would just have to be RHEL or CentOS 6 or 7. And so if you've got your own server or VM, you can do that too. But these are a fully functional 60-day trial, so you get 2 months to try it out. And you can also cluster as many instances as you'd like to. So feel free to spin up a 4 or an 8 instance cluster and really test that out and look at them all work together. So that's possible as well. And then during your trial, well, we really want to make sure you have a successful proof of concept, so we've got a ton of different options available to you. One that I'll point out is the support knowledge base. This is a very useful resource. I use it all the time. It's a great place to find documentation. Here you can find hundreds of technical articles, tutorials, documentation links, 76 different articles for Log Server to help you with a bunch of different setup things, common tasks, troubleshooting. So knowledge base is a really good option, and also the support forum. So we'll jump over to support.nagios.com/forum. And here you'll see a general support section. You're welcome during the pre-sales phase to register a username and then post in general support for direct help from the same support techs you'd work with as a licensed client. So feel free to register a username, click through the Log Server section here, and post for help with any questions you've got. And then these guys in green, these are all actual Nagios techs. So they're happy to help. And again, we want to make sure you have a successful proof of concept. We can also offer you a quick start remote session. For that, just email sales@nagios.com, and we can get some basic details and then set you up for a remote session with a support tech to help you accomplish some common tasks. Maybe get set up, get data coming in from a certain system, create some queries and dashboards, really whatever you need help with, we can set you up for, no problem. And so you've got the free trial, lots of different ways to test it out, and lots of different ways to get help too to make sure that everything works for you and that you're really able to do a great proof of concept and feel confident about Log Server as you move forward to the purchase phase of things. So that's a little bit about the licensing side of things, the free trial, the various support options. Let's jump over to questions here and take care of those. And thanks to those of you that punched in questions. Feel free to add them if you do have anything else you're wondering about. So the first question I see is a question about Log Server architecture. So just general, basically they're asking what kind of resources we have to help you understand architectures. I'm guessing what you mean by that is how Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana all work together, how things like the clustering work, because I gave you a pretty high-level look at it, but not a whole lot of detail. And actually, that's a great question. Here on the knowledge base, we'll do a search for Log Server Arch and see what that gets us, because there's a couple of great resources, actually. So first here we go. So you've got the full architectural overview, and this one's great because it's really in depth. I mean, it covers all the bases. It tells you how all the parts work together, how the clustering works, and gives you a really good look at how it works on a deeper level. So that'd be a really good resource there. That's on the knowledge base. And there's also there's a video. Yeah, here we go. Nagios Log Server Architecture and Overview from the 2015 World Conference. And this is great. It's about 35 minutes long. It covers a lot of what that architectural doc covers, and really quick and easy way to dig into Log Server architecture and have a better idea of how it all works together. And it is really cool. It's really cool how Log Server works. The Elk stack is really cool, and Log Server just further enhances that coolness and makes it easier to leverage and administer. And of course, you got the full support and everything. But yeah, those two resources should be really good for you. And feel free, if you're not able to find any of these resources after the session, feel free to email sales@nagios.com and we'll help you out, help you find whatever you need. But support.nagios.com/KB, and then a quick search here should get you right to them. Next question, probably the most common question we get, is, and this one specifically is asking for 200 Linux servers, how many instances would I need in my cluster? Just kind of from a load perspective, because as I mentioned, the more systems you're collecting data from, and really more specifically, the more data you're collecting, because some systems create more data than others, the more data you're collecting, the more instances you'll need. It's tough to give an exact answer to that question. I'd love to say with absolute certainty that, say, a 4-instance cluster is going to be perfect for you. But it's tough to say because it depends on how much data those systems are generating. So 200 really busy servers, especially if maybe something goes wrong, could generate a tremendous amount of log data. So the main question is, how much log data are you collecting in a given day? On average, how much log data would those 200 systems be generating? Now, that's typically the response, and then a lot of the times the response to that is, well, I really don't know. And in that case, the free 60-day trial would be a perfect opportunity to test it out. Either set up a feed from a pool of common sources and then use that to extrapolate how much data you estimate you'll be taking in, or just set them all up and then see how much data exactly you're getting. Now, a good safe number per instance, so a safe number would be about 20 gig of intake per day. And then, of course, storage is different math. That depends on intake and then how long you want to hold on to it, but we can help you calculate that. However, with strong servers and, depending on the kind of filters that you're running and whether you're doing outputs and things like that, we've seen it as high as 100 gig per instance. So it's really a moving target depending on a ton of different factors, much like the answer to how many hosts and services can I monitor with a Nagios XI server. It's really hard to say because there's so many factors. We can just give you guidelines. But with a couple hundred servers, best guess would be somewhere between 2 and 4 instances. It just depends on how much data they're generating. And again, that free 60-day trial can give you a really good opportunity to get more exact numbers. One thing I'll mention is that RAM definitely matters with Log Server. So probably the two most important things on each of those Log Server instances would be, first, plenty of RAM, up to the maximum that each one supports of 64 gig on each instance. And fast disks. If you can do SSDs, that's going to make a world of difference. So fast disks, lots of RAM, and then on the CPU front, more cores is typically better than faster processors. So go for more cores over faster processors, lots of RAM up to 64 gig a piece, and then fast disks if you can get it for best performance. So yeah, sorry I can't give you an exact answer to that one. But some testing will really help, and like I said, we can give you guidelines and make sure that it's provisioned to meet whatever the requirement is for you. So let's take a look here. See another question about collecting data on non-standard ports. I'm guessing this one means privileged ports. Let me pull up an article here because I'm pretty sure we've got an article for that. So my guess is, based on what you punched in, listening on privileged ports, my guess is that you've got an older device that can only send to a port below 1024. It's hard-coded to send its log data to that port, and there's no way to modify it, and so you have to work around that. This document will actually help you do that. And so we'll click through here real quick. Essentially what you need to do is run Logstash as root. And so this will tell you exactly how to do that, and then you'll add an input, and then you'll be able to actually intake that older data on a port below 1024. So that one should be helpful for you in that respect. And that's, again, right on the knowledge base, Nagios Log Server, listening on privileged ports. And then one more question I see here is about multiple locations. And the possibility of, from the notes that you punched in, I think you're asking if you can put instances at different geographic locations in a cluster. And the short answer to that would be we highly recommend against it. A better scenario would be to set up a centralized cluster and then have the various remote geographic locations bubble their log data upstream to Log Server. That would be the ideal setup. Even a small amount of latency we've found between instances in a cluster can cause the clustering to start to go a little haywire. So you really want them to be able to reliably and quickly talk to one another amongst the cluster. And so the ideal setup would be to have the remote sources, as I said, send their data upstream to a big centralized cluster that acts as the collector for all that data. And then that'll be your central point of collection, of archiving and everything else, and the remote locations will just send their data to the cluster. So that'd be our recommendation there. So taking a look, I don't see any other questions. Really appreciate everybody taking time out to join me here today to check out Log Server. Like I said, if you have any questions at all, feel free to get a hold of us. I'll put up the contact slide here for you. You can give us a call. You can email us at sales@nagios.com. We'd love to hear from you, find out more about your requirements, and outline how we could be a help. Otherwise, again, really appreciate you joining me here today. Thanks for all those great questions, and we'll hope to hear from you soon. Have a good one, everybody.